Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back, my daughter-in-law said at dinner. My own son just sat there and nodded, his eyes empty, as if I'd become invisible in my own home. The house was never really yours anyway, she added, the words slicing through me like glass. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply stood up and walked away, the room spinning with betrayal. The next day, I drove to the bank alone for the first time in decades, numb but determined. I'm glad to have you here, the manager said gently. As I sat down, my hands trembling, I want to share this story with you, not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been betrayed by those closest to them. Comment where you're watching from so I can see how far my words reach. I want my pain, my lessons, my story to help someone somewhere remember their own worth. The dining room felt so empty without Graham. The mahogany table, the one we'd gathered around for every birthday, every holiday, every laugh and heartbreak, now seemed vast and cold. I kept glancing at his empty chair, aching for his gentle smile, his quiet strength. It had been a week since I buried my husband of 32. Years, a week since I stood in the rain, watching the coffin lower into the ground, feeling my soul split in half. The grief was a weight on my chest, so thick I could barely breathe. Pass the potatoes. Ruth, my daughter-in-law Jessica, snapped, her voice as cold as January wind. Jessica never used my first name unless she wanted to make a point usually. That I didn't belong. My son, Ethan, sat between us silent, his shoulders hunched like a boy waiting for trouble. He hadn't looked at me all night. Not once, trying to break the tension, I whispered, "The service was beautiful, wasn't it? Your father would have loved seeing so many people there." Jessica set her fork down with a click, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, well, that's actually what we need to talk about, Ruth." Something in her voice made my skin prickle. I searched Ethan's face for any hint of love or loyalty. All I found was avoidance, a man desperate to please his wife at any cost. Jessica straightened, folding her hands like a lawyer about to deliver a verdict. I'd seen her do it before, when she explained why Ethan couldn't visit or why her family holidays had to be spent with her parents instead. Now that Graham is gone, this house is just too much for you. It's time to be practical. Too much? I'd kept this house together for more than 30 years. I knew every leaky pipe, every drafty window, every memory carved into the woodwork. Ethan finally spoke, voice barely a whisper. "Mom, she's right. The upkeep is a lot. It's just not realistic for you anymore." My heart cracked. "I'm not helpless, Ethan. Your father and I worked for this house, every brick and nail. This is our home, your home." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes bright with calculation. "Memories don't pay the property taxes, Ruth. Be practical. We think you should move to one of those nice senior communities. Activities, people your own age, less stress for everyone." It was like being erased while still alive. Ethan refused to meet my gaze. "It makes sense, Mom, and honestly, Jessica. And I could use the space. We've been thinking about having another baby, and this house." Suddenly, I realized it wasn't just about me being old. They wanted my house. The home Graham and I had poured ourselves into for decades. Jessica's mask dropped entirely. "Now that the sorrow is done, it's time for you to grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. The house was never really yours anyway." The words hung there, cruel and final. Ethan finally looked at me, and for a heartbeat I saw something like shame. But then he nodded. "She's right, Mom. This house was Dad's. Now it's mine. You were just living here, just living here." As if 32 years of love, labor, and sacrifice meant nothing. I stood up, legs trembling. "I'll need some time, 2 weeks," Jessica cut in, her voice ice. "That's plenty of time to find somewhere." 2 weeks to pack up and move on. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I walked upstairs, each step heavier than the last. Our bedroom still smelled like Graham's cologne, his reading glasses, still on the knit stand where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. I sat on the edge of our bed and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was old, tired, defeated. But underneath all the pain, something small and hard started to burn. A flicker of anger. Graham had always handled our finances, but he'd taught me to be thorough, pay attention. Tomorrow I'd call the bank. I'd find out exactly what was mine. Because if Ethan and Jessica thought they could just erase me, they were in for a surprise. The next morning, the sunlight seemed different. It spilled into the kitchen, letting up the dust in the air. I sat with my coffee, listening to the silence. Stealing myself. I'd spent the last 10 days sorting through memories while Ethan and Jessica walked through my house, measuring rooms, talking about renovations as if I'd already vanished. Yesterday, I overheard Jessica on the phone. Will. Start the work as soon as the old woman moves out. Old woman. Not Mom, not Ruth, not even a person. But today I was done being numbed-out. I drove to the bank through streets I'd traveled 1,000 times with Graham at my side. He always said, "Let me handle the money, Ruth. You worry about the garden and the grandkids." I let him, thinking he was taking care of me. Now I wondered what he'd really been protecting me from. Mrs. Collins, the bank manager, greeted me with gentle pity. "Mrs. Pierce, I'm so sorry for your loss." Graham was such a kind man. "Thank you, Linda. He spoke well of you, too." I gripped my purse as if it could anchor me. I need to understand my finances. Graham took care of everything, but now. I trailed off lost. Linda nodded. "Of course, let me pull up your accounts." She tapped at her keyboard, then paused. "Oh my, there are more accounts here than I expected." My stomach clenched. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong exactly," she said, voice cautious. "Just unusual. Let's start with your joint checking." She printed the statement and slid it across. The balance was enough for a few months if I was careful. A second page, a savings account. This one was much larger. I felt my body relax. Just a little, but Linda kept reading, frowning. "There are several accounts in your name only. 2 CDs, a money market account, and a trust established 5 years ago." Did Graham ever mention these? I shook my head. "No, never." Linda looked up, concern softening her face. "Sometimes spouses set up separate accounts to protect their loved ones in complicated family situations." Do you think Graham was worried about anything? Suddenly, so much made sense. The way Graham asked questions about Jessica's spending. How he grew tense when Ethan hinted about money. How he never let Ethan come to the bank with him. Linda printed more statements. The numbers stunned me. These weren't emergency funds. These were serious resources enough to live on for years. But I never signed anything. I whispered. Linda opened a folder and showed me the forms, my signature in familiar loops. "You signed, probably thinking it was just routine paperwork. But everything is legal. These accounts are yours." I stared at the papers, mind reeling. While Ethan and Jessica were measuring for new curtains, I held the keys to a future they'd never imagined. And suddenly, for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, I woke up in the same house I'd lived in for over 3 decades. But it felt different, haunted, echoing with memories and ghosts of laughter that suddenly felt too far away to touch. My hand shook as I made coffee, trying to steady myself with the old familiar ritual. Graham would have made a joke about my trembling hands, tried to make me smile. The pain of missing him sharpened when I realized I couldn't even remember the last thing he'd said to me before. He was gone, but I didn't have time for grief, not now. Ethan and Jessica had set a clock running 2 weeks to erase 32 years. I opened a box in the attic, started filling it with photo albums, thinking about what I'd learned at the bank the day before. My name on those accounts, money. Set aside. Graham had been planning for this, somehow protecting me, not just from the world, but from our own family. I thought of all the times I brushed off his seriousness about money, the way he kept everything organized, double-checking. Papers, making notes, always so careful. I used to think it was a quirk. Now I understood it was a shield. Jessica and Ethan came by again that afternoon, unannounced. Jessica stalked through the house with her phone out, snapping pictures of walls and countertops, muttering about what would need updating. Ethan trailed after her, avoiding my eyes, saying nothing. They barely noticed the boxes I'd started, the photos of their childhoods, my wedding ring, and a dish by the door. I watched Jessica peer into my bedroom, measuring the closet. "We'll have to knock this out for more space," she said. Loud enough for me to hear. It was like I was already a ghost in my own life. That night, I sat on the back steps, wrapped in Graham's old cardigan, staring at the dark yard where our kids had played as children. The maple trees we planted together were bare, but I could still see the outlines of the swing set, hear echoes of laughter from years gone by. For a few minutes, I let myself grieve. Not just for Graham, but for the family I thought I had. The loyalty I thought was unbreakable. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. Found a realtor who can list the house ASAP. Try to have things ready by Friday. There was no love you, Mom, not even a thank you. Just business. I wiped my eyes and went inside, determination hardening inside me like steel. They had no idea what I'd learned. No idea that Graham had left me more than memories. He'd left me security, a future. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for crumbs at the table of people who thought I was disposable. The next morning, I made an appointment with Mr. Barrett, the accountant who had always handled Graham's business affairs. I barely slept the night before, anxiety gnawing at me, but as I sat in the waiting room, I found myself growing calm. For the first time, I was taking charge of my own life. Mr. Barrett greeted me with genuine warmth. Ruth, I'm so sorry. Graham was a good man and a good client. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. I slid the stack of bank papers across the table. Can you help me understand all this? Graham always said not to worry about the business, but he took his time going through each document with care. Ruth, I want you to look at something. He opened a folder and pulled out a set of statements. These accounts aren't just savings. This trust account, Graham set it up 5 years ago, transferring business assets and company profits into it. You're the sole beneficiary. He structured it so that if anything happened, everything would go to you. I stared at him, unable to process the words. But Ethan said Dad sold the company, that there was nothing left but debts. Mr. Barrett shook his head. No, Graham didn't sell the business. He restructured. The business is still active and profitable. Tom Evans, your husband's old foreman, has been running the daily operations, but the trust owns the company. You own the trust. The world tilted. My throat went dry. But Ethan, he thinks he's inheriting everything. Graham was careful for a reason, Mr. Barrett said gently. He worried about family pressure. He made sure you would never be left at anyone's mercy. It felt like I'd stepped into another life, a life where I was not powerless. I was an owner, a partner, a woman with choices. I left the accountant's office with a stack of documents in my purse and a new sense of responsibility on my shoulders. In the parking lot, I took out my phone and reread Ethan's text about the realtor. I let myself imagine his face when he learned the truth, when he realized the company, the house, and the money he felt entitled to belonged, legally and rightfully, to me. For a few moments, I let myself feel vindicated, but mostly I felt sadness. How had my son become a stranger? Where had we gone wrong? Why did I suddenly feel so old and so new at the same time? The next day, Jessica showed up with boxes and a cleaning crew. She handed me a list. Her handwriting was sharp and bossy. Here's everything you need to pack by Thursday. The photographer will be here at noon. I bit my tongue, forced a smile, and nodded. I watched them sweep through the rooms, bagging up things they didn't want, tossing my life into black garbage bags. That night, I sat in Graham's old office, surrounded by his files and ledgers. His handwriting was everywhere, neat and methodical. I found a note taped to the inside of the desk drawer. Ruth, if you ever need help, ask Barrett. Everything is in your name. Love you, G. Tears came then, hard, messy, cathartic. I clutched the note to my chest, letting myself feel the ache of love and loss, the fear and the rage. Then I wiped my face and began to write a list of my own. People to call, questions to ask, steps take. I wasn't going to fight dirty, I wasn't going to scream. But I would stand up for myself, for the life Graham and I had built together. For the dignity I deserved, even if I had to demand it from my own family. The next morning, Tom Evans knocked on the door. He looked nervous, hat in his hands. Mrs. Pierce, I wanted to check on you. Ethan came by the job site asking for company, paperwork, and the keys to the office. I told him I need to hear from you directly. I smiled, my first genuine smile in days. Thank you, Tom. You did exactly the right thing. He relaxed, relieved. Graham always said, Tom, don't do anything unless Ruth says so. I'll keep running things as usual unless you want changes. I shook my head. No changes. You keep doing what you've been doing. If you need anything, you come to me, not Ethan, not Jessica. He nodded, grateful, and I saw the loyalty in his eyes, the kind of loyalty I used to believe family meant. After he left, I called Mr. Barrett. I want to keep Tom running the business. I don't want Ethan involved. That's your right. Ruth, Mr. Barrett replied, a note of respect in his voice. You're the owner now. I hung up, feeling lighter than I had in years. I was still grieving, the pain was still there, raw and sharp. But I was no longer afraid. I was no longer invisible. When Jessica texted again, "Don't forget, photographer at noon," I responded simply, "Thank you for the reminder. Please come after 2 p.m. if you need anything else. I'll be busy with business meetings until then." I put down the phone and looked around my home. I realized with a sudden surge of pride that I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I wasn't leaving at all, not until I decided it was time. I was Ruth Pierce, and I was done being silent. 3 days later, the house was a battlefield disguised as a home. The boxes stacked by the door weren't just filled with dishes and old photographs. They were filled with 30 years of memories, laughter, and heartbreak. I never felt more like an intruder in my own life. Ethan and Jessica swept through the rooms with their realtor, chattering about open-concept kitchens and knocking down walls. They spoke in front of me as if I were invisible, discussing paint colors and where they put their statement art. Jessica showed the realtor my bedroom closet, my closet, explaining how she'd turn it into a home office. Ethan smiled blandly, nodding along, glancing at his phone. Avoiding my eyes like always, I stood back and watched them, feeling a strange kind of calm settle over me. I was hurt, yes, God, I was hurt, but I wasn't destroyed. I knew something. They didn't. I had power even if they didn't see it yet. That night, after everyone left, I opened Graham's file boxes and started going through them again. The paperwork felt overwhelming, but also like armor. Each bank statement, each contract, each trust agreement was a line drawn in the sand, my line, my defense. I stayed up late, reading, highlighting, making notes. It was as if Graham's careful planning was holding my hand, guiding me through the fog of betrayal and grief. The next morning, I called Tom Evans again and asked him to come by. When he arrived, he brought with him a stack of business files and a nervous energy. "Mrs. Pierce, I just wanted to say Ethan tried to get me to hand over the company checkbook. He says he's in charge now. But I told him I'd only listen to you." For a second, I saw Graham in Tom's loyal eyes. "Thank you, Tom. I can't tell you how much that means to me. From now on, all business decisions go through me and only me. You understand?" He nodded quickly, a mix of relief and pride on his face. "Yes, ma'am." "And Ruth, the company's doing well." Graham was always cautious, "but we have a steady stream of work. There's enough for you to live on and then some." Hearing it out loud, the reality started to sink in. Graham had truly prepared for everything. He trusted me to be strong. Even if I hadn't believed in myself yet, that afternoon, as I was sorting through boxes of family photos, Ethan stormed into the house, red-faced and agitated. "Why are you making this so hard?" he demanded, voice sharp, no greeting, no softness. "Jessica's found us a place downtown, but we need the money from this house to close the deal. You're holding everything up." I put down the photo of Ethan as a boy 5 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, arms around Graham's neck. The ache in my chest was deep, but I refused to let it show. "I'm not holding anything up. I have business to take care of, and so do you." He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Business? Since when do you know anything about the business? Dad always said you hated paperwork." I stood a little taller. "Your father taught me enough, and he trusted me with more than you realize." Ethan's face twisted, and for a moment I thought he might apologize, might show even an ounce of remorse. Instead, he just shook his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not the one trying to force my mother out of her home before she's ready," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "You have your plans, Ethan, and I have mine." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Then, without another word, Ethan turned and slammed the door behind him, leaving me alone with the ghosts and the sound of my own heart pounding. That evening, Tom called. "I thought you'd want to know." Ethan showed up at the site again, asking about equipment, asking about the company accounts. I told him he'd have to talk to you. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers to my temples. "Thank you, Tom. I'm going to need you to keep documenting everything. Don't let anything change, not one thing, unless you hear it from me." "I will, Mrs. Pierce, I promise." After hanging up, I pulled out Graham's old journal, the one he kept, locked in his desk drawer. Inside, among notes about projects and deadlines, I found a letter addressed to me, sealed and yellowed with age. My breath caught in my throat as I carefully opened it. Ruth, if you're reading this, something's happened. Maybe I'm gone. Maybe things are hard, I'm sorry. I wanted you to know that I've always loved you, always believed in your strength. If anyone ever tries to take from you what we built together, don't let them. Fight for it, you have everything you need. Don't be afraid to use it. Love always. Graham. Tears stung my eyes, but they were different this time. Not grief, not loss, but gratitude, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Graham had given me a weapon. All I had to do was wield it. The next day, I met with Mr. Barrett and Tom at the office. We reviewed the trust documents, double-checked the business ownership, the accounts, the chain of command. Everything was airtight. Ethan had no legal authority he never had. The business was mine, and with it, the power to determine my own future. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Jessica showed up together, faces set with matching determination. We need to talk, Jessica announced, barging into my kitchen. This house is going on the market next week, whether you're ready or not. The realtor has already lined up buyers. I let them talk, let them bluster and threaten, watching them act as if they'd already won. When Jessica said, "You'll be out by the end of the month, one way or another," I simply smiled and handed her a folder copies of the trust. The business documents, the mortgage details. You might want to read these before you make any more plans, I said quietly. You don't own the house, and you certainly don't own the business. Jessica's eyes flashed with outrage. This is some kind of trick. No trick, I replied, voice steady. It's all legal. You can call my lawyer if you have questions. Ethan snatched the papers from Jessica and scanned them, his face draining of color as he realized what they meant. You can't do this. Dad, he would have wanted us to have the house. He promised. I looked at my son, my voice soft but unyielding. Your father wanted me to be safe, to be free. I'm sorry if that isn't what you wanted, Ethan. But I won't be bullied out of my own life. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. But I didn't flinch. I stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, I felt something fierce and alive rising inside me. I was not powerless. I was not a victim. I was Ruth Pierce, and I was done letting anyone decide my worth. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sunset, golden and beautiful and entirely mine. 3 days after that confrontation, the energy in the house shifted again, less of an ache, more of a simmer. I woke early, nerves buzzing, and watched the light climb across the ceiling. It was the first morning since Graham's death that I didn't cry when I opened my eyes. There was still an ache, of course, but underneath it something new, a stubborn, growing resolve. I spent that day consulting with Mr. Barrett, sorting through more of Graham's records, and making calls I never imagined I'd have the courage to make. Every time I opened another folder or signed another document, I could almost feel Graham's presence at my side, encouraging me, steadying my hand. You have everything you need. Don't be afraid to use it. His words echoed from that old letter, and I clung to them like a lifeline. The doorbell rang mid-afternoon, and when I opened it, Tom Evans stood on the porch, a little sheepish but earnest as always. Mrs. Pierce, there's a problem, he said. Ethan's called around to some of our subcontractors. He's trying to convince them the business is his. I exhaled sharply, frustration flashing hot behind my ribs. And what did you say? I told them the truth. That Ruth Pierce is the owner, and only Ruth Pierce can make decisions for Pierce Construction. He smiled, a little proud of himself, but nervous too. Some of them were confused, but they trust you. They trusted Graham, and they trust you now. Thank you, Tom. That means everything to me. Keep telling them the truth. Don't let Ethan intimidate anyone. He nodded. I won't. He hesitated, looking at his shoes. I know this is hard, but you're doing right by Graham, by everyone. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the list of projects for the next 6 months. The business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The work Graham had done, the work Tom now carried forward, was honest, stable, steady. Every quarter, the profits would land in my account exactly as Graham intended. No one could take that from me. Not Ethan, not Jessica. Not anyone. As the sun set, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. We're coming by tonight to talk. Jessica says we need to clear the air. There was no hint of apology in the message, only expectation. He was still my son, and he expected his mother to fall in line. I braced myself for battle. When they arrived, Jessica marched into the living room, face pinched, hands tight around her designer bag. Ethan followed, his jaw set, eyes cold. "We've talked to a lawyer," Jessica announced, without preamble. "He says you can't just cut us out of the business and the house. There are laws. You can't just do what you want." I stayed, seated in my armchair, spine straight. "You're welcome to bring your lawyer here. I've consulted with Mr. Barrett and the trust documents are airtight. The business is mine. The house is mine, at least until I decide otherwise." Ethan looked like he'd been slapped. "But Dad always said your father didn't trust you, Ethan, not when it came to money. He wanted to protect me, and he did. The loans you took, the money you owe Pierce Construction is all documented. You can check with Margaret at the accountant's office if you like. There's nothing hidden, there's just reality." Jessica's eyes went glassy with shock. "You're lying. He would never do that." I opened the folder on my lap and handed her a sheet of paper. "This is a list of every loan. Signed by you, Ethan, signed by Graham, signed by Tom as a witness. The total is nearly $90,000. If you want to fight me in court, be my guest. But you might want to consider what that would do to your reputation and your finances." Ethan sat down hard, his breath gone. "This is insane. You're tearing our family apart." "No, Ethan, I'm just refusing to let you and Jessica destroy what your father built and what I've worked just as hard to preserve. I loved you as a little boy. I loved you enough to believe in you when maybe I shouldn't have. But I won't let you walk all over me just because you think you're entitled." Jessica broke first, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You're heartless, you're cruel. We're your family. Family doesn't mean theft, it doesn't mean entitlement. Family means protecting each other even when it hurts." There was a long, seething silence. Ethan's face crumbled, his shoulders slumped, and for the first time since Graham's funeral, he looked at me like a lost child. But I didn't move. I didn't comfort him. "Not now, not after all this." Jessica stormed out, slamming the front door so hard it rattled the glass. Ethan followed, but not before turning to me, voice trembling. "You'll regret this, Mom." I stood up, heart hammering but steady. "I regret a lot of things, Ethan, but standing up for myself will never be one of them." When the house was quiet again, I finally let myself cry. Not for Graham, he was gone, but he'd left me prepared. Not for myself, I was stronger than I'd realized. But for Ethan, my son, who had become a stranger. For the love that had somehow gotten lost between us. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the moon rise. I thought about all the women I'd met over the years at church, at the grocery store, at the library, women who'd been forced out, pushed aside, made to feel small in their own homes. I promised myself that I would not become one of them. Not now. Not ever. I sat in the quiet, letting my resolve harden into something unbreakable. Tomorrow I would meet with Mr. Barrett again. Tomorrow I would call the accountant and Tom and make sure every single asset was locked down, every document filed, every dollar accounted for. If Ethan and Jessica wanted a war, they'd get one, but it wouldn't be the kind of war they expected. If you've ever faced a moment where your own family tried to erase you, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know how far this story reaches. The next part of my journey changed everything. Morning sunlight slanted across the kitchen table, catching the swirl of steam from my coffee. I sat quietly watching the dust motes dance, feeling both small and strong at once. I'd spent most of the night replaying that confrontation, reliving Jessica's shrill accusations and Ethan's hollow threats. I always believed that family, above all, would protect its own. But when the masks fell away, the only one fighting for me was myself. I was determined not to let this day unravel me. After breakfast, I called Tom Evans to confirm that all company assets were secure and no access could be granted without my signature. His steady voice brought comfort. "Everything's locked down, Mrs. Pierce. Nobody's touching a thing unless you say so." "Thank you, Tom. Truly, you and Graham built something good. I won't let it fall apart." Next, I phoned Margaret, the accountant. "Has Ethan been in touch again?" I asked. She sighed. "Twice this week. Wanted to know about liquidating company trucks, selling equipment. He's desperate for cash. I told him nothing can be done without the trustee's consent, and the trustee is you." The knowledge settled inside me like a stone. My son, the little boy I once held close, was now circling like a vulture. I try not to let it break my heart. Midday, I received an email from Mr. Barrett. All trust documents reviewed. Everything is solid. If they pursue legal action, they'll lose. I stared at the words, reading them again and again. I'd worried about being alone, about being weak. But Graham had set up protections so meticulously that not even Ethan and Jessica's combined bitterness could break them down. The phone rang. I answered, expecting another volley of threats or demands. Instead, Jessica's voice snapped down the line, brittle with rage. I hope you're happy, Ruth. Ethan is a mess. Our friends are gossiping. He's drinking too much, blaming you for ruining his father's legacy. I closed my eyes, exhausted by her venom. Your problems aren't mine to solve, Jessica. If you need support, find it somewhere else. I'm done being your scapegoat. She hung up on me, leaving the air buzzing with unfinished anger. I sat, the phone aside, hands shaking. For a moment, guilt threatened to drown me, but I refused to let it win. I had a right to defend what was mine. That afternoon, I walked the perimeter of my property, touching the old brick walls Graham had mortared. By hand, the azalea bush I'd planted the year Ethan was born. I realized that I'd given this house, this life, all of myself for decades, and now, finally, I was claiming it back. Later, Tom dropped by to deliver the latest project bids. He lingered at the door, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Are you holding up okay? I managed a tired smile. Better than yesterday. Worse than tomorrow, I think. Tom hesitated, then asked softly, Do you regret standing your ground? The question caught me off guard. Did I regret fighting my own child for the right to live in my home, to hold on to what Graham had left me? Did I regret refusing to be bullied, manipulated, erased? I thought of every night I'd lain awake, terrified of what would happen next. I thought of Jessica's words, Grieve, pack your bags and never come back, echoing like poison in my memory. And I thought of Graham's quiet faith that I was stronger than I knew. No, I said quietly. I don't regret it. Not a second. For the first time in my life, Tom, I know exactly who I am. Tom nodded, a kind of pride softening his features. Graham would be proud, and so am I. He left, and I went back inside, a little steadier than before. That evening, Ethan showed up alone. No warning, no text, just a knock at the door as twilight settled. I opened it to find him standing there, shoulders slumped, eyes bloodshot. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy he'd once been, searching for comfort after a nightmare. Mom, can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in silence at the table, the same place where Jessica had banished me with those cold words. Ethan's fingers picked at the edge of his sleeve. I don't know how it got like this. He finally whispered. Dad always took care of everything, I thought. I thought after he was gone, things would fall to me. They did, Ethan. You just didn't see how Dad was protecting both of us, even when we didn't deserve it. He looked up, face twisted, with regret and stubbornness. I never meant for it to get so ugly. Jessica, she pushes, you know? She always wants more. I stayed silent. I didn't trust myself to speak. Ethan's voice broke. Are you really going to make me pay all that money back? I thought of the trust, the company, my freedom. Yes, Ethan, it's not just about the money, it's about respect. Your father built safeguards, so I wouldn't be left with nothing. I will honor that, even if it means you have to grow up the hard way. He bowed his head, a broken figure in the fading light. I wish things were different. Me too. But we can't go back. When he left, I watched him walk down the drive, his footsteps slow and uncertain. I shut the door, my heart both lighter and heavier at once. Night fell. I stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the stars, wondering if Ethan would ever truly understand. Wondering if I could ever fully forgive. But I was no longer afraid. And as I turned away from the window, I felt deep in my bones that I was finally standing on my own. If you've ever found the strength to say enough to someone new. Love, tell me how you did it. Your stories help me feel less alone. The next chapter would be the hardest and the most freeing. The days that followed were strangely quiet, as if the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for some final judgment to be passed. I busied myself with little things, packing boxes of Graham's old clothes for donation, sorting family. Photographs into albums, dusting shelves I neglected for years. Every chore, every memory was bittersweet. Sometimes I caught myself talking to Graham as if he were just in the next room, asking his advice, cursing him for leaving me with this mess, then whispering my gratitude that he had prepared for everything, even this. Ethan and Jessica stayed away. For a while, I hoped Ethan might come back not to argue, but to apologize, to be my son again, just for a moment. But I knew Jessica would never allow it, not after what had happened. She was too proud, too wounded by the loss of what she thought was rightfully hers. On the third morning, a letter arrived by courier, stamped with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart thudded in my chest as I opened it and unfolded the neatly typed pages. It was exactly what I feared. A formal notice that Ethan and Jessica intended to contest the trust, alleging that I'd exploited Graham's declining health and manipulated him into changing his estate. The words stung, ugly, and false. But they were just that, words, not truth. I brought the letter straight to Mr. Barrett. His eyes scanned the lines, mouth tightening with every accusation. "They don't have a case, Ruth," he said at last, voice calm and reassuring. "Graham's trust is airtight. The documents are clear. All the signatures are in order. There's no evidence of coercion, and every account shows your husband acting of his own free will." I tried to smile, but my hands trembled as I handed over the rest of the paperwork Margaret and Tom had helped me organize. Will it be ugly? It might be. They could drag it out, hoping to scare you or force a settlement. But I promise you they can't win. If they take it to court, we'll counter with evidence. Tom, Margaret, the bank, everyone can testify that Graham was in full control of his faculties and acted with complete transparency. I nodded, clutching my purse like a shield. "Do you think Ethan really believes I manipulated Graham?" Barrett's gaze softened. "I think he's hurt and Jessica is angry. People do strange things when they feel betrayed. Sometimes it's easier to blame someone else than face their own choices." The legal proceedings started almost immediately. There were hearings, affidavits, depositions. Jessica arrived in expensive suits, her face pinched with resentment, while Ethan avoided looking at me at all. Sometimes I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, a flash of the boy I'd raised, but it was always chased away by Jessica's glare. I tried not to let the process consume me, but it was difficult. Each new letter from their lawyers, each veiled threat was another cut. Still, I forced myself to remember what Graham had done. He hadn't left me out of spite or favoritism. He'd left me the means to survive, to stand on my own, to never be powerless again. During that time, I leaned on Tom and Margaret more than ever. Tom came by every week to update me on the business. He never spoke about Ethan or Jessica unless I brought them up, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. He'd loved Graham too. Sometimes after Tom left, I'd sit at the kitchen table and cry, letting the grief and anger flow through me in great aching waves. One night, after a particularly grueling day in court, I stood in the backyard under the stars, breathing in the cool air. I thought about how everything had changed, the loss of Graham, the betrayal of my son, the house that no longer felt like home. But I also thought about everything I gained, the knowledge that I could survive, the courage to protect myself, the determination to create a new life. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was mine. Every hard-won inch of it. A week later, Barrett called with the news I'd been praying for. "It's over, Ruth. The judge dismissed their claim. You're safe. Everything stays as Graham intended." Relief was overwhelming. I laughed then, cried, and then laughed again, giddy with the knowledge that I'd made it through the storm. My hands shook as I hung up the phone, but for the first time since Graham's funeral, they were shaking with hope, not fear. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat out on the back steps, letting the warm air settle around me like a blanket. I looked up at the sky and imagined Graham up there somewhere, smiling down at me, proud that I'd survived with my dignity and future intact. But even as the legal battle ended, I knew there was one last thing to do. I needed to say goodbye to this house, not because I was forced out, but because I was choosing to leave. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere that wasn't shadowed by betrayal and loss. In the morning, I started searching for a place by the ocean somewhere, peaceful, where I could listen to the waves and remember that I was free. If you've ever had to let go of a home or a dream because of someone else's greed, tell me how you found your peace. I promise there's a way through, even if you have to carve it with your own two hands. Packing up the house I called home for over 3 decades was both an act of courage and mourning. I took my time, not because I was stalling, no one was forcing me out now, but because each object had a memory, A heartbeat, a piece of my story with Graham. I wrapped our wedding photo in soft towels, smoothed his favorite blanket over the back of a chair, and ran my fingers along the kitchen counter where I'd watched him make coffee every morning for years. I wept over the smallest things, a faded recipe card, a silly note he'd left in my jewelry box, the little ceramic dog that had sat on our windowsill since the year Ethan was born. The finality of it all pressed in on me. But I found a strange power in making each decision myself. Every box I filled was an act of reclaiming my life. I gave away what I didn't need, sold what held no love, and reserved the best memories for myself. I was doing this not out of fear or obligation, but because I finally wanted to. Tom came by one afternoon, sweat on his brow and kindness in his eyes. "Moving day's getting close, Ruth," he said gently, helping me lift the heavy boxes into his pickup truck. "You sure about the coast?" I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after so many months of tension. "I am. Graham bought that cottage for us to have peace someday. It's not what we planned, but I want to wake up to the sound of waves. I want to live somewhere that's mine through and through." He nodded, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're braver than most. I'll keep the business going just as Mr. Graham wanted. Call me if you ever need anything." The real estate agent arrived the next day, surprised to find the house already clean and nearly empty. She walked from room to room, making polite conversation about the neighborhood and its excellent market value. I listened, detached. This place had been my life, but I was ready to close the door behind me. That night, my phone rang, a call from Margaret Morrison. "I just wanted to hear your voice, Ruth," she said softly. "You did it. You stood your ground." "I had help," I replied. "From you, from Tom, from Graham, even from myself, finally." Margaret hesitated. "There's something else I thought you should know. Jessica and Ethan tried one last time to appeal the court's decision. The judge refused to hear them out. He said your husband's intentions were clear and your right to the trust is unquestionable." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a burden lift off my shoulders. The legal war was finished. My freedom was more than a legal document. It was the life I carved out from grief, betrayal, and 1,000 small acts of resilience. Before I left, I spent one last morning wandering from room to room, whispering goodbye to every corner. I thanked the old maple tree outside the kitchen window for its shade. I pressed my hand to the front door, remembering every time Graham had walked through it, bringing laughter or groceries or bad jokes. I closed my eyes and let my tears fall, not just for what I'd lost, but for what I found in myself. When the movers came, I was ready. Tom followed me down the driveway, his truck rumbling behind the moving van. At the end of the block, I didn't look back. Not because I wasn't sentimental, but because I'd already carried everything worth keeping with me. I drove west, past the city, past the last remnants of my old life, until the air changed and the world opened up. The ocean greeted me with the sound of its endless tides. The little cottage was smaller than my old house, but when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The next morning, I stood on the porch with a mug of hot coffee, watching the sky lighten over the water. My phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. No words, just a photo of him as a boy, sitting on Graham's shoulders, both of them laughing. My heart clenched, but I didn't reply. Not yet. Healing would take time, and maybe some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. But now at least I could choose the terms of my own peace. I breathed in the salt air, let the sound of the waves fill the silence, and realized I wasn't alone. Graham was still with me, and the courage he'd given me, and the security he'd left behind, and every lesson about standing up for myself. And out here, with the horizon stretching wide before me, I finally understood. Home wasn't just a house. Home was the place where I could live honestly, without fear, and without begging for love that should never have been conditional. What would you do if everything you loved was threatened? Would you fight? Would you run? Or would you, like me, learn to stand alone and find that it was enough? 6 months later, I'd fallen into a quiet rhythm in my oceanfront cottage, a place I never would have imagined calling home. Not while Graham was alive, and certainly not when Jessica and Ethan tried to strip everything away. Each morning, I woke to the gentle shush of the tide, the cry of gulls, and a wide sky that belonged only to me. My days were filled with little rituals, strong coffee on the porch, walks along the shore, tending the garden that was already beginning to bloom with the season's first wildflowers. Some nights I sat by the window with a book, listening to the wind and letting the peace settle around me like a new skin. Graham was still everywhere, in the photos lining my mantle, in the warmth of the sun on my face, and the knowledge that he'd made all of this possible quietly, so I'd never have to beg for dignity. Henderson Construction thrived under Tom's management, and every quarter, a neat sum landed in my bank account, proof of my security and my husband's foresight. I spoke to Tom often. He called every Friday just to check in, his voice always gentle and steady. "We finished the Marshfield job ahead of schedule, Ruth," he'd say, pride evident. "I'll send you the numbers next week." Not everything had been resolved so neatly, of course. Jessica and Ethan tried one last. Desperate time to contest the trust and overturn my claim. Their lawyer dug for weaknesses, searching for any sign of coercion or fraud. But Margaret Morrison's careful records and Graham's relentless attention to detail left nothing to chance. The judge ruled swiftly. The trust was airtight. The business and assets were mine, and their mounting legal bills were now their own to bear. A letter arrived in the mail not long after, in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. "Mom, I know you'll never forgive us for fighting you, but I wanted you to know I finally see what Dad was doing. We took so much for granted. Jess and I are going to counseling. I'm working 2 jobs. Maybe someday you'll want to talk again. I'm sorry for everything." I read it twice, set it aside, and felt the ache of regret, but also a new resolve. Healing, I knew, would be slow if it ever came at all. But at last, the choice belonged to me. One breezy afternoon, as I snipped roses for the kitchen table, the phone rang. "Hello, Mrs. Callahan? This is Linda Morrison, Margaret's daughter. I hope I'm not intruding." Her voice was gentle, familiar somehow, though we'd only met once at a community fundraiser. "Of course not, Linda. What can I do for you?" "My mother told me about your story. I'm starting a support group for women who've survived financial betrayal by family. I wondered if you'd consider sharing what you've been through, just a little encouragement for those who feel alone." Her request surprised me. I was no expert, no public speaker. But the thought lingered. How many women like me had trusted too much, asked too little, and been left at the mercy of others? Entitlement? That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun sink below the horizon, the sky ablaze with color. I thought about Graham, about the battles I'd never asked for, the strength I'd found in myself, the kindness of strangers, and the hard lessons learned at the hands of those I loved most. I thought about Linda's invitation and the possibility that my pain could mean something, help someone, change a life. So I said yes. A month later, I stood in front of a small group of women at the library's community room. My voice shook. At first, but as I spoke, I saw faces light with recognition, nods of understanding, even tears of relief. I spoke about protecting yourself, about learning what you're owed and what you deserve, about the difference between family loyalty and letting yourself be trampled. I spoke about Graham's love, the practical kind, the kind that puts safeguards in place for the day when love alone isn't enough. When the meeting ended, a woman hugged me, whispering, "You've given me hope. Thank you." I left with a new sense of purpose. Not revenge, never revenge, but self-respect and freedom, hard-won and precious. Now, as I sit on my porch with the breeze in my hair and the salt air on my lips, I wonder about the women who will hear my story. The ones who will draw courage from it, the ones who will choose to stand up for themselves even when everyone expects them to fold. The grief is still there and always will be, because love once given doesn't just vanish. But above it all, there is peace and gratitude and pride in the woman I became when everything I knew was threatened. And if you're still listening, I want to ask, what would you do if the people you loved tried to take everything from you? Would you fight back, or would you give in? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Let's see how far stories of hope and resilience can travel. Thank you for being here, for hearing me out, and for believing, with me, that no one is ever too old or too alone to change their story. 2 more stories are waiting for you on the screen, each one a testament to how far women can go when they refuse to give up. I hope you'll watch them and remember, your story too can have a different ending. Ask ChatGPT.